Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night live stream. A week or two back, I told you that I was working on some Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament. And as far as what I have James, Jude, Revelation, and then Matthew, Mark, and John, I think. Supposedly there's more, but these are interesting because they have phrases that go back to the Second Temple period time. You can't prove that they are or are not legitimate or been tampered with, etc., like any other manuscript. But basically, one of the things we were talking about, as I shared with you, several things I thought were interesting. One is that the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelation was the four are white, red, black, and then green. And in the book of Zechariah, you've got horsemen that are white, red, black, and then speckled. And so the first three are identical, the last is different. So that's made some people think maybe they're connected, maybe they're not. Obviously, the symbolism means something, but do they have anything to do with each other directly? And what we found out in that particular Hebrew version of the manuscript, it wasn't pale or pale green, but it was actually speckled. So the Hebrew version, which may date from the 1st century or somewhere in that neighborhood, agrees with the description as in Zechariah. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of go through and show you why I think it's important to put the two together. I do think they are connected. And I think Revelation shares what's going to happen in the proper order, but I think Zechariah 6 gives us a little more detail on where things occur. And I think that's kind of important, or should be. So let's go ahead and look at this. Let's see here. Let me pull this up. So here is, let me just read Revelation first. Revelation chapter 6. And yeah, it looks good. It says, I saw the Lamb opened one of the seals. Remember, this is the scene in heaven where there's a 7-sealed scroll. The Lamb comes and opens the seals, and that actually starts the tribulation period. So he opens the first seal. And what happens is he opens one seal, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. One of the four beasts saying, come and see. And I saw and behold a white horse. And this is, by the way, this is King James, so it's the regular Greek. But anyway, I want to share that with you. It's the white horse first. And he who sat upon him had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And so typically most of the church fathers, most of people today that are premillennial, pre-trib, would say this is the Antichrist. Okay. It's definitely not the church taking over if the church has just been raptured. And we talked about that, I think, in that chapter too. But that chapter, a week or two ago when we were talking about that. So anyway, so if this is after the rapture, the 24 elders are standing there, everyone's in heaven, and now the tribulation is about to begin. And the first thing is this white horse comes, and it's given to him to conquer. And he does conquer. He has a bow, so he comes with peace, enforces it with war, etc. So he conquers, okay? Then it says he opened a second seal, and I saw the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red. So first is white, the Antichrist, red, which is war. And it says, and power was given to him that sat thereon on the red horse, to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. So red represents war. Okay. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat upon him had a pair of balances in his hand. Let me run this up a little bit. And I heard the voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see that you do not hurt the oil and the wine. So this is often referred to as famine. So it gets very, very expensive to have your daily bread or your daily food. So Antichrist, war, and then famine. And it says, then he opened the fourth seal, and I heard a voice of the fourth beast say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, there was a pale horse. And in Greek, it actually says pale green. And in the Hebrew version, it says speckled. So the speckled part agrees with Zechariah. It's two words, and the two words are identical. So we can argue exactly what they mean, what kind of horse, but it's not super important at that point, just to know that these four horsemen are identical. So I looked, and behold, there was a pale horse, pale green, spotted, speckled. And his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed him. And power was given to them over a fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. So the sword, it would be war. Hunger is starvation. Death might mean disease or natural causes, or the Bible also talks about men's hearts failing them for fear, so of what's coming on the earth. And then with the wild beasts, we see this in Joel and in other places during the day of the Lord. It says that somebody would run from a bear and manage to escape, stop to catch his breath, and put his hand up on the tree and get bitten by a serpent. So it's like everywhere you go, there's some sort of an animal trying to kill people. Whereas today, almost all animals are scared of people. You have to corner them before they attack a lot of times. So it's different then. And then there's the fifth seal, which is the souls under the altar, and on down. So Antichrist, white, war, red, black is famine, and then pale green or spotted is death on a fourth part of the planet, a fourth part of Earth. And I've often noted this. I thought it's interesting to look at when you're going through this. This is the first few things that begin. If you divide the world, however many people we have at the time when this happens, into four parts, and this destroys 1/4 of the earth. So if you take that and you move that, you got 3 of the original 4. Now later on, something comes in and it destroys 1/3 of everything. So if you take the remaining population and take away 1/3, that leaves 2. So it's actually half if you think about it. So half of the planet is destroyed, then it gets really bad. So you really don't want to be here during the tribulation period. So that's Revelation. Now, what I want to share with you before we get to Zechariah, I want to show you a map. Now, this is just a regular map of Israel. And I want you to note that Jordan didn't exist way back when, but Israel was there in the middle. To the south is Egypt, and to the north is Syria and Lebanon, but specifically Syria. Lebanon might have been part of Syria at the time, but what we're talking about is during the Greek period. Alexander the Great came and conquered the known world, including all of this. Remember, Cleopatra is actually mentioned in Daniel 11, and Mark Antony and things like that. That was down in Egypt. And Antiochus Epiphanes, the guy that sacrificed a pig on the altar, created a statue of Zeus, things like that, that he's from Syria. So what happens is Alexander the Great conquers the whole territory, and then when he dies, as prophesied in Scripture, the kingdom is not left to his kids. So there's no son of Alexander that takes over the entire empire. What happens is, and this is interesting because the Bible says that it would be divided into 4 pieces, but he had 5 ruling generals, and there were plans to divide it into 5 pieces. But before Alexander died, one of the generals actually died. So then when he died, the plans were changed, and it was divided into 4. And so this gives you an idea of why it's important to look at these things, because sometimes we think, well, that's not the way it's going. It's going to be the opposite of what Scripture says. Well, that's the way they're planning to do it now, but it will end up the way Scripture predicts. So, not that God is making it, but God is telling us the way it eventually takes place. So, very, very important to look at prophecy. But anyway, and with this in mind, it's the entire kingdom is divided into four parts. One is Greece proper, and that's the area of Greece. The other is Asia Minor, which we call today Turkey. That was another one. And then there was the Seleucid Empire from the general Seleucus, who was up here in Syria. Okay. And then there was Ptolemy, who created the Ptolemaic Empire down here in Egypt. Now, this is a normal pattern that we see with a lot of the empires. They fragment into four pieces. Actually, most did at one point or another, which is a fascinating study. But for our purposes, Greece and even Turkey at that point had nothing to do with Israel. So as far as a prophecy about Israel is concerned, it's only going to deal with two of these four heads. That's the prophecy that you've seen, and we've talked about it a little bit before, of the goat with its the unigoat, the unicorn type goat with one horn that's broken off, and then in its place four horns come up, and it represents these four fragments of the empire becoming four small empires. So what happens then, and we're going to glance over it, it's all in Daniel chapter 11. And this is, you have to kind of know this to figure out the Zechariah chapter 6. So what happens is they're ruling to the north, Syria. Egypt is independent, or Israel is independent in the middle, and then Egypt is ruling to the south. So in the Daniel text, Syria then, under Seleucus, becomes the Seleucid Empire, is called the king of the north. And then Egypt, which is south of Israel, is called the king of the south. So the Ptolemaic dynasties are the kings of the south. And then what happens is, at first, Egypt will decide it wants to take more territory and go up and actually attack and maybe take part of Syrian territory. So the border of Egypt from here expands all the way up here to Syria. And it doesn't get very far at first, but that means Israel now is owned by Egypt. Okay. Then a few generations goes by, and then Syria decides to run everybody out, and they take it down to here and try to actually go into Egypt and fail. Now the border down here is Syrian territory. So Israel first is independent, and then it's conquered by Egypt, so it's part of Egypt. Then it's conquered by Syria, so it's part of Syria. And then Egypt, and then Syria, and then Egypt, and then Syria. And we see this in the prophecy of the I think it's the 10 gaps in the prophecy of Enoch. So we have an Enoch playlist that we did earlier. You can go back and look at that. And this goes along with what Daniel is describing in chapter 11. So this keeps happening until finally Rome steps in. And Rome first conquers Egypt, and that's Mark Antony, Cleopatra, all that stuff takes place. And then at another time, they come in and they take over Syria, or push back Syria. And eventually in 64 BC, General Pompey marches into Jerusalem and declares this to be all Roman territory. So now from Syria to Egypt is all Roman territory. And the cutoff is not the Jordan River, but it's somewhere back here. And then on this side, on the other side of the end of the Roman Empire, was the Parthian or Iranian Empire at the time. And so that's an interesting set of prophecies there. But anyway, so just so that you understand this, so the point is, in Daniel, when you're talking about not the beasts, but specifically the metals, the empires of Greece, or Greece itself, is brass or copper. So you're going to have a copper empire up here, Seleucid Empire, and a copper empire down here in Egypt during that time period, because they're all ruled by Greeks. So it's an extension of the Greek Empire. So that's the point I want to get to you with this. So now, just so that we see something, I want to show you one other thing, and then we'll get to our main study in Zechariah. So here's Daniel, and this is from our book, Ancient Book of Daniel. So it's just the book of Daniel from the Bible, King James Version, with lots of commentary. But basically, it starts off with verses 1 and 2 of the angel Gabriel predicting how many kings will be there in Persia. So this starts in the first year of Darius, and Daniel has a dream. And he's told, yes, Darius and Cyrus are ruling. There's going to be 3 more, so a total of 4 kings. And then that kingdom will fall to the Greeks. There'll be this main guy, and then the Greek Empire will be fragmented into 4. And of course, he sees that much in chapter 7. But this goes on and is extremely detailed. And this is why a lot of, should I say, Christian non-believers, people that claim to be Christian, look at this and say, there's no way this could have been written in 500 BC. Daniel couldn't have written it because there's no way he knows about modern prophecy. Or modern history, rather, history that's 300 to 400 years after his death. Except for us that know things, we understand there's prophecy. So God told him what's going to happen. If you don't believe in that, then you have to assume this was written by someone else. However, when we have pieces of this found in different places, like Persian Empire writings that are dated back to 400 to 500 BC, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you could say maybe Daniel didn't write it, but it can't be made up in the time of the Maccabees, because the prophecies go all the way up to the Romans destroying the temple, burning it by fire, and then what happens later. So no way to get that. So anyway, he gives us the Persian period of those rulers, and that's 536 to 326 BC. And of course, in the commentary, I tell you who they are and where they ruled from and stuff. So the Greek under Alexander the Great, he comes and conquers it. And we've got all this detail here. And then Ptolemy Soter the first, Seleucus Nicanor takes control of Syria after Alexander's death. And then Ptolemy the first takes control of Egypt. And that starts these 2 empires, right? So the basically we just call it Syria and Egypt if you want to, the Greek versions of those. And so then we have Bernice marrying Antiochus the first or second to try to make peace after a battle. And then the assassination attempt that is, all these things are mentioned in chapter 11, and you have to go back in history and see what exactly happened. And it matches perfectly up until probably verse 30 or so. And then we got the next Ptolemy taking over, who's the brother of the guy that was killed. So he mounts a counteroffensive and attacks Syria. And then we got the 2 Syrian brothers that mount together and actually go down and attack Egypt. And then you've got the next generation of Egypt attacking Syria. And then the other guy, after a peace of a while, new guy comes along, the 5th guy, Ptolemy, 5th Epiphanes, attacks that. And even the Bible even talks about a certain port, Rapha, and the different battle that happens, and so many people gets killed. It's really fascinating. And then Antiochus takes full control of Israel, but not Egypt. And then Antiochus gives Cleopatra to Ptolemy as a way to try to control it. He's a kid, basically, 10 or 12 or something like that. He gives his daughter in marriage to that king in order that the daughter can have some influence and make that king do what the father wants. It's, using his daughter to control the other guy. But Cleopatra falls in love basically with the Egyptian people and does what she thinks is best for the Egyptian people, kind of betraying her father. So you guys all know that story probably, but this is back then. So then a Roman consul comes in and defeats Antiochus at the behest of the Egyptians. And then the new guy tries to attack and plunder, but he doesn't dare go into Egypt because it's technically Roman territory, and you're going to get the full effect of Rome on you if you do that. So he stops and does stuff with Israel. And then we have Antiochus Epiphanes that most of us think about. So we've got Antiochus Epiphanes and all the things that he did. And some of the things here are not quite the way he did it. So we're seeing that Antiochus Epiphanes is a type of the Antichrist. Most of this stuff is exactly how he did it. And presumably then the Antichrist will do it just like this. So that's something that we need to study. And then, of course, he ends up dying and that kind of stuff. And then there was the betrayal, all that stuff in Scripture. And then he attacks Jerusalem. And then the high priest tries to do a, basically to push back against the kingdom. He gets mad, comes in. And there's details on this in 2nd Maccabees, how all that takes place. And then we get to Antiochus attacking Egypt and then being repelled by Rome. And so this is interesting. We get all the way up into Daniel chapters 11, verses 29 and 30. And what you've seen so far when you read this, again, is that Greece breaks up. 2 of the 4 is Syria and Egypt. And Israel keeps getting passed back and forth between these two 10 times, according to Enoch. And then the way Daniel describes it is the different battles. So this should be drilling in your mind that we have a king of the north, probably Syria. And in modern times, it could be Syria / Lebanon / Iraq, or, even part of Turkey or anything up there. It's somewhere to the north. If they divide into 10 little states, it still would be that area. And the south is mainly Egypt. But Egypt at that time as an empire had a little bit of Libya, a little bit of Sudan. I doubt Ethiopia, but that area. So king of the north, king of the south, that's the main thing. So Antiochus kind of typifies the Antichrist. And then the time of the Maccabees come. That's verse 32, which is 164 to 64, when Rome actually takes over Jerusalem. And we understand a lot more about that history now because of the Dead Sea Scrolls and their Zadok history. So fascinating. And then we have the Roman occupation all the way up to the diaspora, which is coming here. They fall by the sword, flame, and captivity many days. So the important part is you've got this very detailed history going back and forth between the king of the north and the king of the south, which is Syria and Egypt, okay, going back and forth, back and forth. And then at one point, Rome takes over and dissolves Israel. So this has to stop, but it doesn't stop in Daniel. So what happens is we have an 1800-year gap, and then Israel comes back. So when Israel comes back, then we see that this pattern continues. Hasn't really continued yet, but there's going to be something between Egypt and Syria, again, the king of the north and the king of the south. So that's important. So what we have is we get down to 34 and 35 as the rise of the Antichrist. And it basically talks about this is after Israel fizzles out, ceases to exist, but then now Israel is in their land again. So it has to be sometime after 1945, or 48 rather. And it says, the Antichrist comes in here, and we talk about the religion. It describes the religion that the Antichrist teaches. And then we get down to this one, the Great War, and then Jordan being spared. And that's a whole other set of prophecies, too, about what happens to Jordan. Anciently, it was Moab, Edom, and Ammon. And the 3 areas that used to be those 3 countries have now come together and formed one country, which is Jordan. And the prophecy is that when the Antichrist does take over, somehow Edom, Moab, and Ammon, i.e. Jordan, escapes from his hand, his wrath. And then the church fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls give you a good understanding of how that happens, what exactly it means. But Jordan takes the case on this. But I want to share with us, we'll stop here with this, but just look at verse 40. It says, and at that time, the time of the end. So towards the time of when the kingdom is established, the end of the age of grace, we have the same thing again. And there's a king of the north and a king of the south, again, just like there used to be. So unless there's something different, basically we're talking about Syria and Egypt, or maybe Egypt with Libya and Sudan, and Syria with Lebanon and Iraq, or something like that. But there's a king of the north and a king of the south again. That's the important part. It says, at this time, at the end, at the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at him. So it starts off, he's conquering and doing things up north, maybe conquering Israel. I don't know if he gets that far yet. But at a certain point, Egypt, the king of the south, pushes at him. Now, later on in Daniel, it talks about Egypt, Libya, and what we would call Sudan are these three kingdoms, 3 of the 10 that attack the Antichrist, and the Antichrist comes and actually destroys it. If we had time, the interesting thing about it is he destroys it, and in his attack, somehow, according to Zephaniah, the Nile River ceases to exist. So in my book on the rapture, one of the chapters is dealing with the issue that one of the guys said, well, aren't you scared that if you teach a pre-trib rapture and it doesn't happen, it will make people lose faith? And the answer is absolutely not. It would if you just taught the rapture. But there's more prophecies in Scripture than just the rapture. And the point being is in that chapter, we looked at 10 prophecies that happen at the beginning of the tribulation period. So if I'm wrong and say it's a mid-trib or post-trib rapture, would people lose their faith? No, they would see 9 out of the 10 prophecies fulfilled and wonder how I got the other one wrong. If anything, it would drive them to Scripture, because 9/10 being correct, that's pretty interesting. So how did he get, he must just be off or something. And so they would go to see why it's, and figure out it's mid-trib or post-trib or whatever. So it's not going to affect someone's faith in that way. If anything, it would make it stronger. But one of those 10 prophecies is that the Nile River dries up. And that's why I think it's interesting. Sometimes you'll hear people say, I think the seals have started. We're in the tribulation period. One question. Is the Nile River still here? Yes. Then we haven't started the tribulation period yet. Well, we're halfway through it now. Is the Nile River still here? So I keep telling people that. It's like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Yeah, it's you need to know all the prophecies, not just one. So anyway, so the point is that's a major thing. So if the Antichrist, say, used a tactical nuke or did something and caused the Nile River comes down from the mountain area, so like any river, it comes down and goes out to the sea. If something up here in the mountain changed and it went the other way, then the old Nile River would dry up. That would cause a bunch of disease, things like that, which it talks about. It becomes a very diseased place. So that's important to our study too. So he comes in and attacks and does those things, and then that happens. So from Daniel 11, then, I want you to see that the kingdom to the north, the Syrian area, which is where the king of the north, the Antichrist, comes from, is one thing. And then the king of the south is Egypt, and the Nile River dries up and causes disease. So according to this, so disease starts mainly in Egypt. The Antichrist starts mainly in the area of Syria. And there's other prophecies and church fathers that tell us that kind of thing also. But this is Daniel. So now let's go to our text and read it. And then we'll come back and I'll show you a picture. So first, let's go to Zechariah chapter 6. And so this is the interesting part to me. So now that we know for sure they're connected, because the Hebrew version of Revelation doesn't say green or pale green, it says speckled and bay. It agrees completely with Zechariah. So let's look at this vision. Now understand, Zechariah is an interesting book that we need to be very familiar with, because we have several visions in it. There's the vision of Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah of Nazareth. There's the vision of the 2 witnesses who are the 2 olive trees. That's in Revelation and in Zechariah. There's the 4 horsemen that are in Zechariah and in Revelation. And then you have Mystery Babylon in Zechariah as the woman in the basket, and chapter 17 and 18 of Revelation. So there are many things that parallel. So this is just one of those. So that's why I think it's really important. So look at just verse 1. And then I'll show you a diagram that it's not finished, but I've been working on it to try to pull these together. I turned and lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there came 4 chariots out between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. So we'll stop there. This is telling us the map to use, or the idea. So let me show you. Let me just take this down here. Here is a picture of the horsemen as described in Zechariah. So the first thing I want you to note is all these horsemen are just in an area somewhere on the planet, okay? But they're between 2 mountains of brass. So again, going back to what we just learned, if Alexander the Great as Greece, which is the brass empire or the copper empire, takes over, then it fragments, and Israel is being tossed back and forth between the north mountain of brass, which is Syria, and the south mountain of brass, which is Egypt. And that's all about chapter 11 of Daniel and Enoch's 10 silent periods. So this is the setting then. So we're talking about Israel, obviously, because that's the only thing, Israel and or Jordan, because they're between Egypt and Syria. So that's the important part. So we've seen that somewhere along the line, Egypt becomes very diseased when the Nile River dries up. And then the Antichrist probably comes out. He's the king of the north. So he's the king of Syria, or the king of Lebanon, or the king or ruler, whatever, or of Iraq or something like that. But Syria is the main thing. And Assyria is in there too. But it's all the same territory. Understand when he comes, whether he comes originally from Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or whatever, he expands and takes over. So eventually the north is going to be the kingdom of the Antichrist, no matter which one he came from. So the kingdom of the north, the brass mountain, the kingdom of the south, a brass mountain. And then you've got white, black, red, and speckled and bay horses. Okay, so let's go back to here. So his thing, he sees these chariots of horses coming, and they're all at this point in the beginning between 2 mountains of brass. Okay, so obviously Israel between Syria and Egypt. The first chariot, there were red horses. Now in Revelation, red means war. Okay, and then the second was black horses. Black means famine. And then the third chariot was white horses that symbolized the Antichrist and the conquering. And the fourth chariot was the grizzled and bay horses, or the spotted. And again, in the Hebrew version of Revelation, those 2 words are identical. So this is the pale green, as it says in the Greek, like the King James. So it says, and I answered and said to the angel that talked with me, what are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said to me, these are the 4 spirits of the heavens, which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. The black horses are they which go forth into the north country, and the white go forth after them. So black and white go forth. That means they travel from somewhere, presumably right there in the middle, which is Israel. They go north toward that mountain of brass. Black and white go up north. And then it says, and the grizzled go forth to the south country. Okay. And the bay went forth and sought to go that they might walk to and fro through the earth. Now, this is interesting too. This word here for earth is the word eretz, and it can mean earth like the entire globe, or it can mean land. And land can mean like the dirt in my backyard, or I own a house with a plot of land, in a city. So that's my earth, my property, my land. The land of Israel or some other country can have their own land. So this word actually can mean several things. So eventually the Antichrist does conquer the entire planet, or the known world anyway. But at this point, are we talking about where he starts out from or the entire thing? So this probably should be translated land. So let's read it like that. So the bay went forth and sought to go that they might walk through the entire land of Israel, that area between the two mountains. And he said, get you hence and walk to and fro, to and fro through the land. So they went to and fro through the land. And then he cried on me and spoke to me and said, behold, these that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. So this could be talking about both back then and now. So we understand that when the Jews came back under Cyrus, you've got Persians and you've got Syrians and you've got Egyptians and things like that. So at this point, they're quieted. Now, if we had time and wanted to look at chapter 1, that's another chapter that has the same four horsemen in it. So really interesting. Zechariah 1, Zechariah 6, and then Revelation 6. So with this in mind, let me give you my theory. So if we know that Revelation has white, red, black, and speckled and bay, and that represents the angel of death and Gehenna or Hades, that's what it says in the Hebrew, or death in general and hell in general is what it says in the Greek. So we got these four. The last one is 2, so it's kind of like a 5-part thing. White, black, red, speckled, and bay. And Zechariah is seeing this between the mountains of brass and the mountain of Egypt, so north and south. Now, they're all originally in the middle, which is Israel, and the black and the white go up to the north. Okay, so that probably tells us that the red horse, which is war, starts in Israel. So we're talking about not a war in China or war in the United States or something like that, but it's specifically a war in Israel. And no, I don't believe it's the one going on now, because this setting is not here. We're still here, etc. But so if the white horse goes up north, it becomes the horse of the north, so to speak. So does the black horse. So if we're looking at this, this symbolizes the Antichrist coming from Syria, or the north part. As we're told in Daniel, he's the king of the north, so that fits. And then after this seal, Revelation has the red seal, which is some sort of a war in Israel. So the Antichrist comes from Syria, or that area, and he comes down apparently to Israel after ascending, taking his power up north, comes down and starts some sort of a war. May or may not be the Battle of Armageddon or any particular one. It's at this point, we don't know which one we're talking about, just a war. And then after the red horse of war, the next thing we have is a black horse, which is famine, according to Revelation. And the famine begins up north. So the Antichrist, with his army probably taking that stuff, causes famine. The famine starts in the north and comes down. And it could be not even Syria at that point, but northern Israel. But somehow there's a war and famine starts. Now, right now, they're having a war, and the main part of Israel that's being affected, the side was being affected with Gaza, or the southern west side, I guess, if you want to call it, the rockets coming in that way. So that's pretty much been neutralized. And right now they're having the third Lebanese war. Second one was 2006. This is 2024. So anyway, rockets are coming down from the north. So at this point, the people in Israel that would flee to safety would be the people of the north. And if they're trapped in bunkers for very long, that would be the first thing that would happen would be famine. So anyway, somewhere along the line, we have the Antichrist up north, and we have famine up north. We have a red horse or war in Israel in the middle. And then the speckled and bay horses go south. And of course, again, when we tie in the fact that when the Antichrist begins his stuff, Egypt pushes at him. And if Egypt is pushing at Syria, the battleground is going to be Israel. That's where the red horse comes in. May or may not have anything to do with Israel. But if those two are battling, right now, if Syria declared war on Egypt and vice versa, Israel is caught in the middle. That's just the way it is. They're between the two mountains of brass. So the pale green, or the disease part, starts in Egypt then. And then we have that prophecy about the Nile River drying up, which would definitely start a lot of disease. And then we go forward, then there's the souls under the altar and stuff. So my theory, and this is all my theory, is that Zechariah is telling us where the four horsemen start out of. And so if we plug in Daniel and Zechariah 6 and Revelation 6, and then Zephaniah for the Nile River drying up, and all those things together, this fits perfectly. So Antichrist, king of the north, he has a war with Egypt, which apparently is situated in Israel somewhere, causing a famine to the north, and then disease in the south, the speckle. And then the bay horses, it says, goes around the entire land, or earth, but probably land, to see what's going on. So I think Zechariah is giving us a clue to the locations that Revelation is giving us the details to. So that's all I have for you, but that's my theory based on those. So I learned this a long time ago. I was trying to figure the prophecy out, and it's like mountains of brass, since we've got the testament of Noah giving the empires, and the brass mountain is Greece, which is the same in Daniel 2 and in Daniel 7, and then the details being in Daniel 11 that we just went through. It's a pretty interesting thing. So I'll go ahead and stop there for tonight, and we'll go to the chat room and see if there's any questions. So, okay, we have a few here. Okay, Eric became a member level angel. Thank you very much for the support. We really appreciate that. Go here. Okay, and next the question is this the Cochin version? Yes, yeah. The two main versions, well, there's the Shem Tov version, which may be based on a much earlier version, but we don't know for sure. The Cochin version, and then the, I think it's called the Gaster version, look like they're the same family of manuscripts. So there's two different sources, basically almost identical in what they add or leave out or change the language in. So that's what I've been looking at. It seems these books are copies of copies of copies. Yes, that's true. So the origin based on Aramaicisms is a lot older. Do the other manuscripts have the same indicators, such as Gad? Oh, Gad, yeah. Gad does, in my opinion. There are several words that are used anciently, and I double-checked. They're used now normally in modern Hebrew, kind of been brought back. But in the Middle Ages, like, well, not Middle Ages, but like First Temple or Second Temple period, rather, and then going forward, they were not used. Shell is one, and then there's a few other words. So to me, it looks like it's based on a much older manuscript, unless it was made up, in the last 100 years. But the copies, when you look at the style of the writing, I don't know if they did any radiocarbon dating, but the general idea is that they're at the very least 1,000 years old. So like, 1,000 AD or something like that. So if they're back in that time period, at least, and they're using the language for much older, it's a copy of a copy of a copy that's spanned the times. Much like the Hebrew versions, there are words in there that came into use around the beginning of the first century and began to fall out of use like about 100 AD, 150 AD, something like that. So somebody was either a very good forger, so to speak, not now, but back then, and created one based on how it probably would have looked. But that's very difficult to do. You really need a team of people. If I was to try to do something like that, I would use a handful of words that I'm aware of from that time period, but I would miss probably a lot. And other people, like a team of scholars, would go over it and decide, no, this has got to be a forgery because he uses these, but he doesn't use those. So there's something wrong, because back then they didn't do that. So they'd know it's at least been edited or something. So yeah, same indicators on those. And I don't really have enough of Nathan to know for sure, but that's from that same area. So the book of Jasher, chapter 80, talks about the Egyptian plagues. It mentions God bringing the Selanuth from the sea, verse 19. What is this creature? Is it mentioned in any other writings? Not that I know of. But if you know the description, or look at the description, it looks like it has long arms and can grab stuff, and it's from the sea. Arms, well, everything's got two arms, but multiple arms with being able to grab things. So to me, that seems like a tentacle from a large squid or octopus or something like that. They would have tentacles so they could reach out and grab something. So multiple arms. The octopus and the squid that we know today, I don't think, even if they were huge, doesn't seem like they could actually crawl up and grab something and kill it. If it is like a kraken or something big like that, maybe. But that's the way the description is, something along those lines. Every creature that's described that we don't know about seems to be absolutely impossible. And my example to this is in the 1950s and back, people kept having this legend. They say, well, yeah, I saw one, kind of like we do Bigfoot now. But the legend back then was this two-headed duck that you don't mess with because it would bite and it's poisonous. But it's a two-headed duck. And of course, we look at that and think that there aren't any creatures like that. It doesn't make any sense. Well, finally, they found one. I think it was in the 1950s that it became officially a thing. And today we call it a duck-billed platypus. And its rear end has two dots on it that looks like eyes, and its head is flattened. So when you look at it at first, it looks like there's a head on each end. It does look like that. And duck-billed platypuses do have like a certain puncture thing on their feet that's poisonous. So the two-headed low duck thing actually is a thing. So there's lots of things like that. We might one day find out that Bigfoot is some sort of strange ape-like creature or something. So to prove it, all you got to do is capture one and show it off. And to me, it's amazing when you go back and look at the world of, I think it's called xenozoology or exogenealogy, but mythical creatures type stuff. And you keep finding things that are, legends, and then they turn out to be true. And usually they're not exactly the way the legend says. But in that case, the best description seems like some sort of large octopus or something coming out of the sea and grabbing with tentacles. But yeah, I don't have any other information on it. Seems like if it did that, it wouldn't be a large octopus. So could it be that the speckles and the spatters of blood on the pale horse from the carnage and warfare? Oh, that could be. Yeah, that's one thing that we're not sure why. The Antichrist is evil, but he looks good at the beginning, looks like a savior. So I understand the white horse. Red is like blood, so war. Famine is just darkness. You can't see or do anything, so you'd be starving. And then things that are putrid and decaying are kind of green sometimes, or maybe speckled with diseased, or some sort of scales, not scales, but I mean like Well, like if I scraped myself and it got infected, there would be spots of infected parts on there. So it's probably something like that. That's probably why they used it. So for my purposes, and there's different kinds of speckled horses. So whichever one this actually meant, it's hard in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, to tell if some, like it's a red stone. So is it a ruby? Is it a garnet? What is it? Or it's the whatever that lives in the rocks. Well, I don't know what that is. It's, hedgehog or something, you could guess. So numbers get garbled a lot. And a lot of times we don't know crystals and colors and things like that. And they seem to get garbled. Or odd creatures that are translated like that. So that very well could be. It's got to have something like that to do with it because that's the pattern. Okay, do you think we may be about to see the prophecy fulfilled of Israel taking southern Lebanon? It definitely looks that way. What chapter or verse is this again? Well, the main one for that is the book of Obadiah. It's only like 21 verses. But the Obadiah predicts that they will take and keep southern Lebanon. The border in Obadiah is a town called Zarephath. Okay, and Zarephath is where Elijah raised the widow woman's son. Remember that story? Zarephath is still there. It's a very small town still, and it's currently called Seraphond, Lebanon. And if you're going along the coast and marking cities on the coast, there's Seraphon, and there's Sidon, and then Seraphon, and then there's Tyre, and on down like that. So right now, the official truce from the last war is that Hezbollah will not come south of the Litani River, and they are, and so Israel's trying to push them back. If they would stay north of the Litani River, then there would be, well, you always get better missiles, but most likely they couldn't rain down missiles like they were doing. And so that's the point of pushing them back. And all the modern records say they're supposed to be north of the Litani River. Well, the last city, before you get to the Litani River is Seraphond, or ancient Zarephath. So Obadiah says Zarephath would be the border. It is as far as the last city on the coast going down to that area. And the actual border is supposed to be the river, but Israel might have to control both sides of the river, because somebody coming in shipping arms or something, who knows. Either way, it's a really interesting story like that. So, and then when we plug in Zephaniah, I believe, it talks about so many Jews living in southern Lebanon that there's no room for them all. And then we get the tribe of Benjamin coming back and being in Gilead. That hasn't happened yet. But the prophecies about Bashan, which is Golan Heights, that's all, halfway taken care of. So that's in process. And then they have to colonize the Negev. And then there's a few other things. The rest of the Sepharad Jews come home. So that's in process. So it's really interesting. And then part of Obadiah is all, and I think we've got some videos on it. But part of Obadiah is talking about the 48 and 67 wars and how they happened. So part of Obadiah is absolutely fulfilled. So it's fascinating to look at and see these things. But what happens, if you think about it, this is the third, I think it's the third. So we had a war with Lebanon, and they immediately gave it back. We had the second war with Lebanon, and they took it. We were basically going to keep it. So that would have been a fulfillment of the prophecy. But later on, some politician decided, well, we shouldn't do that, and gave it back. So now they're repeating the war again. Same thing happened with Gaza. They took it over, gave it back, had to take it over again. They wanted independence, so Ariel Sharon gave them independence in, I think it's 2015, or 2005. Anyway, a ways back. And then that's when Hamas came on the scene, which is mentioned in the other prophecies. And then, so now they're at war with that again. So somewhere along the line, they take it and keep it. But every time they take it, if a politician later on gives it back again, then, you're going to have to do the whole thing over again. It was interesting in I think it was when they were voting under Ariel Sharon to give Gaza independence. Netanyahu actually addressed the Knesset, and it was a really interesting. The speech is online still if you want to look it up, but it's a really cool speech. He basically says, "Don't do this. You're giving our enemies the means to gather weapons. You're going to pay for this, and it's only going to cause mass bloodshed, rockets being fired, this kind of stuff. You need to keep control of that so that doesn't happen." And they voted to go ahead and do it anyway. And of course, now he is prime minister trying to fix their mistake. So again, it's pretty interesting. So this is the third round. Hopefully this will be the last one. But yeah, if somebody gives it back again later, then we're going to have to do the whole thing again. So, but if you're thinking like I am, the rapture's around the corner, there probably isn't time, because they would take it and control it and keep it for a while anyway, until some politician gives it back. And so you're talking like a decade, I would assume, more or less, for them to rebuild again and then attack again. So very interesting. Good question. Hopeful Saint became a member. Thank you very much. Again, thank you guys for buying the books and donating through Give, Send, Go and PayPal and being members here. Oh, by the way, our last book was Ancient Prophecies in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we came out with that last spring, sometime in the spring. And so we have the book and the Kindle. The Audible book has been in process for a while. And just one thing after another, we kept having to delay it and everything. So it was finally finished and approved, I think, yesterday. So I don't see it on Amazon yet, but within the next few days, there will be an Audible version if you guys want that. So basically, you go to Amazon, it shows a paperback and a Kindle and an Audible. So we finally got that one done. On our second channel, we're up to Gad chapter 7. So we're in the process of putting not the teachings or the commentaries, but just the texts. We would like to have most of the Dead Sea Scrolls that are not badly fragmented, but the major pieces of it. So maybe Damascus Covenant, Jasher Jubilees, Gad, Nathan, if we could get more of it. So things like that, much like you go to a site and do a King James Bible, you can just pick a chapter and listen to it. We'd like to be able to do that with the scrolls and the church fathers. So be very helpful. I find it helpful to listen to it over and over again. That's when you find out things that nobody else noticed. These things go together. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Super chat donation. Thank you very much. The church began in 32, 33 AD. Shouldn't we expect the millennium 2,000 years later? It seems logical. The calendar on the Dead Sea Scrolls would have the year 6,000 as 75 or 76, which is from where the temple was destroyed and the age stopped. But on the flip side of that, yeah, the church was born the same year Jesus died, from Passover to Pentecost. So the church age itself is 2,000 years old in AD 2000, 31, 32, 33, somewhere in there. I believe it's 32. But so, yeah, those are things that we still are kind of, obviously the church age started then. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar obviously starts in 75, so there's a 40-year gap. And it was explained in the scrolls that the 40-year gap back then was to engender repentance. Basically, the idea is it's a time of persecution and repentance, at the end of which, if you haven't repented, you're destroyed. And we can read the historical accounts of how the temple was destroyed and how bad it really got at that point. So yeah, no matter how we look at it, I look at 2032 rather, as something has to happen. Maybe it's not the rapture, but something interesting. And in 2025, it begins that last generation according to their calendar, or that last Jubilee cycle. And I would have guessed that all of these wars we're talking about would start in that last generation. But as you can see, it looks like they've started a year ago. So again, it's in that time period. And maybe the calendar's off slightly. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt, but still want to try to study everything. BP&E became a member. Thank you very much. And then let's see here. Looking Up became a member. Great, thank you. Do you know why the genealogy in Matthew is missing Jehoiakim, which appears in 1 Chronicles 3? Everyone else appears the same except for, of course, the non-kings. I'm not sure. There was a thing about, I'm trying to think which one, if that was Jehoiakim or not. Actually, no, I don't. I'd have to go back and look that up. It could be that they used a different name. I remember Konijah was one name, like in Chronicles it's called one thing, and then in Kings it's called another. So it might be there just by a different name. We'd have to look that up and see. So $50 grant. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you very much. Glad you guys are liking that. Super chat, $100. Thank you very much. Your teaching comes at the right time and we appreciate it. Great. Well, thank you. Super chat, $10. Thank you for the studies. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. What are the 10 prophecies? Let me see if I can look that up real quick. Give me just a second. And I'll give you the 10. It's in our book. Where'd it go? Here we go. Rapture. So, I'm doing that wrong. There we go. Put this over here. And let's find it here. I think it is Revealing of the Antichrist. I think this is the one. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so these are just 10. I mean, there's a lot more than 10, but these are, in my opinion, 10 big ones. Number one is the Jewish people return home. That was in 1948. So connected with that, the temple is ordered to be rebuilt. It doesn't necessarily have to be built, but the order goes forth to do it, according to Daniel 9 and the other one. So eventually it is built, and the Antichrist stops the sacrifices. So they have to build a temple in order to start proper sacrifices for the Antichrist to come in and stop the sacrifices. So that has to happen. And that confuses a lot of people because they think, well, but that's not right. Whether it's right or not, the prophecy is not saying God wants this and he's going to make it happen. The prophecy is like, when it's time for me to come, these things will be there. So these are signs. So it's just one of those things, might be good, might be bad, but that's a sign you look for. So the temple rebuilt, and then the 10 nations arise. You'll be able to see 10 nations. And then the Antichrist becomes the leader of the 10. So there's 10 nations that form a coalition. And that's why we're looking for 10 anything. A lot of us thought that the European Common Market was it, because it's part of what used to be the Roman Empire, and it was 10 nations. But it quickly expanded to 27, which is not part of the prophecy. So, and then now some of the founding members, like England, is pulled out of it. So, at least I think they did. So anyway, but obviously it's not the 10 nations. So if they reconstitute it and do it all over again and there's 10, then that's something to look at. People look at like the G10. They're not nations per se, but powers. So anyway, different ideas like that. But there's a 7-year period, 10 nations start off, but then there's this 11th state or this 11th country that comes in. That 11th one is the king of the north. It'll be Syria or Lebanon or somewhere up there. It'll be from the north. And the ruler at that time will be the Antichrist. And his name will equal 666 when it's spelled out. My name, by the way, Ken, is 72. So just wanted to throw that in there. And then the other one is the Antichrist is the king of the north. So when people say maybe it's the prince of Saudi Arabia, that's not north of Israel. So that can't be. And of course, there's prophecies about Saudi Arabia in Scripture, what side they're on and what they do. So anyway, and then prophecy 7 is the Antichrist will enforce the covenant. There is some sort of a covenant, which is some sort of land for peace deal between Israel and its neighbors. And it's put on the table, ratified and everything, but never enforced, probably because one side or the other refuses. When you're at war and you make peace terms and everybody accepts the peace terms, so the war would technically be over, but they keep fighting anyway, the war's not over. So that's the situation. And the Antichrist comes in and says, okay, this stops now. And this is how I'm going to do it. The next person that picks up any kind of a weapon, I kill. I don't care if it's every single one of you. It stops now. And if he has the ability to enforce that, the war will be over. And so there's this covenant on the table, and we see the covenant now. It's been around for a long time. It's land for peace, and it's gone through several incarnations, so to speak. And it's still technically done and signed, but there's a war going on. So it's never going to come to fruition until somebody forces it to do so. And that would be the Antichrist. And then Egypt attacks the Antichrist armies at that point. So this is all in the first part of the tribulation period. And then Egypt is destroyed. And that's from Daniel 11:42. He stretches forth his hand also upon those countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So the Antichrist goes to war with Egypt and destroys it, basically. One part of that destruction is, and I think it's in a couple of places, but here's Zechariah 10, about the river drying up, the pride of Assyria will be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart away. Now, this scepter of Egypt part is actually fulfilled now. Scepter means king, basically. And there were kings of Egypt all the way up to, I forget his name, the last king guy. But, and then Nasser, was it Nasser? I think it was Nasser that took over and officially made it an elected position. So there's no more kings by definition. Whether he's a dictatorship and manipulates the voting or whatever, he's still in control, but it's technically not a kingship. So like when he dies, it's not automatically guaranteed to be his firstborn son inheriting the kingdom. It's whatever. So the scepter of Egypt has departed. There's no more kings in Egypt. So that part is, but this river drying up, that's never happened yet. And then in Isaiah 19, the fierce king comes and rules over them, and the waters fail from the sea, and the river will be wasted and dried up. So that's just an example of 10 prophecies that I put together. So, and then of course, here's the stuff about from our other book, all the peace covenant and stuff. So anyway, so that's what we've got so far. And like I say, there's a lot more than that. But I mean, that just tells you that we're not in the middle of the tribulation period. I remember being on a talk show, internet, but it was, we were talking about it. And this guy comes on and starts talking like, any minute something's going to happen. And it's like, are you thinking we're in the tribulation period? And he's like, oh yeah. And he said it started when somebody signed something. And I said, well, what about the Antichrist sitting in the temple? There's no temple. And he's like, oh, well, temple means the place where you worship. And I think he said Barack Obama was the Antichrist. And Barack Obama had went to Israel and given some sort of speech in the Church of the Nativity where Jesus was born. And he equated that to be the Antichrist in the temple breaking the covenant. And I said, well, the prophecy says that he's the ruler of the king of the north. We're west. And it was interesting how they have comments for this. He said, no, if you take Israel like Jerusalem and you go north and you go all the way up through Russia, over the North Pole, and keep going down, you get right to Washington. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, they have an answer for everything. And so I told him, it's like, so 3.5 years from now, when it does not happen, are you going to apologize for being a false prophet? He's like, well, if it, and of course he didn't. He changed his theology at that point. So Barack Obama, that was that was before, Trump, which was before Biden, and so that's, a long time back. So, and it didn't happen. So it's one reason why we don't set dates, but those are the 10 prophecies. Some of the prophecies anyway. Are there any prophecies regarding 2 moons? So it's odd. People have been having 2 moon tied to the rapture dreams. Now NASA is saying that an asteroid is going to come into our orbit like a second moon. Not that I know of. Nothing about 2 moons. Now we do have the prophecy in Revelation about wormwood, which presumably is an asteroid of some sort, or meteor. Something comes and crashes on the planet and poisons the waters. If it's literal. I mean, it could be symbolic, but if I take it as literal, unless there's a reason to. 7-headed red dragon's got to be symbolic, But this star called wormwood falls to the earth. And that's one thing that was interesting. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but in the Hebrew version of Revelation, it doesn't say wormwood, it says scarlet. And I looked up the word scarlet, and it's a specific word for like crimson red. And apparently there is a type of worm that's red colored, crimson or scarlet colored, that eats up the crops and causes disease and rot and stuff like that. And that if that's in water, it would poison the water. And so I thought it was interesting. It's actually a crimson worm. So a poison crimson worm, or wormwood, or scarlet. It's kind of interesting how that started. But same thing. There's some sort of, apparently it's colored red of some sort, and it's poisonous. It poisons the waters. But no, nothing about 2 moons that I know of. Be interesting to find out. Can you please help to explain BC, before Christ, and Christ being born in 2 or 4 BC? Yeah, basically, we started, the calendar that we go by today is the Julian calendar. It was started by Julius Caesar about 46 or 48 BC. And that was exactly like we have now. And that goes all the way up to, with the months, like January having 31 days and stuff like that. So it's the same calendar we use today. In the Middle Ages, they revamped the leap years to make it more, we got about a week off. And so they changed it so that it would be a little more accurate. And now it's called the Gregorian, with that change in it, that one change. But basically, they started it, and I'm not sure when they started this, somewhere around the line, they changed it from the Roman date of whatever to be based on when Christ was born. And so the date they picked was a certain date. So that's why right now it's 2024. So the date they picked, as a guess anyway, several centuries later, was 2024 years ago, should have been the birth of Christ. And so the way things work, I don't see a problem with that. But a lot of scholars are trying to say, well, if this happened there and this was a full moon and there was an eclipse, it would have had to have been this year instead of that year. And this guy was ruling, but he wasn't ruling yet, according to that set of manuscripts. So they're always trying to revise the history. They're trying to make it more accurate. So there are 2 manuscripts that basically that would pinpoint 2 BC. But then there's a manuscript that says that Herod, the one that tried to kill Jesus, died in 4 BC. So Jesus would have to have been born in 4 BC or sometime before, if that manuscript is correct. And so that's where they're getting it from. So they're trying to say Jesus was born in 2 BC or 4 BC or whatever. But it's basically, the calendar's not quite correct. It was a guess when they put it up. So the Gregorian calendar might be, in my opinion, off 2 years. Since there's no 0 year, it's actually 1 year difference. But that's basically it. Just like the Jewish calendar now is 57 something. It's like 200 years off from the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And my version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar could be off. So you don't know anything for sure. We're just trying to get as accurate as we possibly can. But that's a good question. JC refers to the Great Tribulation as 3.5 years. Has this any validity? Yeah, the tribulation period itself is 7 years. It's talked about in Daniel 9:27. There's that last week. The church fathers all interpret it that way, the early church fathers. So it's a 7-year period. The last half of it, which is that last 3.5 years, is referred to as the Great Tribulation, or the time of the Lamb's wrath, stuff like that. So there are some different terms to try to break it up from the first half and the last half. It's all the tribulation, but the last half is the Great Tribulation. So people tend to harp on that, though, if they want to try to be a mid-trib person. They'll try to say that, the tribulation is only 3.5 years long, so it has to be, which is kind of weird. If it's only 3.5 years long, then they're not a mid-trib person. They're actually a pre-trib person, but they've just shortened the tribulation period. So, but anyway, yeah, it's 7 years long. The Great Tribulation is the last half of it. In Matthew 12:24, would the Queen of the South mentioned be from Egypt? Or the Egyptian held a larger area of what's now Ethiopia, could have been considered Egypt. Yeah, their empire grew and shrank, so I'm not sure how far they went. And I'm not exactly sure where Sheba is. Presumably it's like Eritrea or Sudan or Ethiopia. It's in that area somewhere. Don't know how large it was either. If it was very large, then it's definitely part of that area. But yeah, so that's why she'd be called the Queen of the South. She's down there, Egypt, or actually even further south than Egypt proper anyway. New member here. Well, thank you for joining us. Recovering Catholic. Well, good to hear. Do you consider the Ethiopian Bible legitimate scripture, or are there some of the books questionable? Some of them are questionable. Basically, you have the Old and the New Testament, the same 66 that we do. And again, every translation's a little different, but pretty close. You can compare NIV to King James. They're both based on Greek, but there's slight differences. But it's, for the most part, the same. The Ethiopian, okay, so the Protestants have 66, and everybody agrees that's scripture. The Catholics and the Orthodox will add the Apocrypha, so that runs it up to 72 if you include them as separate books. And I think those are good historical. And Second Ezra, for instance, has prophecy in it that's legit. We've done a book specifically about that. But they do have errors in them. And that's from, not being kept in the canon, just in certain scrolls and how they're copied. They weren't taken with the same care. So there's several different things, like in Judith. It's supposed to be a story of the Israelites in one of their wars to the Assyrians, but it mentions King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, that's not Assyria, it's Babylon. So somebody edited it or changed it or something. So there's historical errors in it. Doesn't mean the story is not true. And you can get some really interesting things at it. I like Sirach, for instance, not as good as Proverbs. Proverbs is, when you read it, is obviously godly wisdom. Sirach is more earthly wisdom. Still good, but it's just, Sirach is not in the caliber of Proverbs, just saying. But I like them both. But the Ethiopian Bible goes on. They have, I think, 80 some books in their canon. I'm still trying to get a hold of some of them. There's some of them that are not available even yet, as far as I know. But that's where we get the the only full version we have of Enoch and Jubilees. And especially when you look at Jubilees, the numbers are all garbled. So that's pretty interesting. The fragments we have of Jubilees in the Dead Sea Scrolls are identical, except the numbers agree with Genesis. So I find that fascinating. But there's several others. There's Epistle of Elijah, which doesn't have what it's supposed to have in it. Josephus describes that there was an epistle written by Elijah, and I would love to get my hands on that. But the one they have does not seem to be legitimate. So anyway, but there's several things. There's a big book, which is kind of like the Didache, how to do stuff, but it's a lot of how they run their church, like bishops and deacons and nuns and this and that, and who does what and why, and how much they get paid and how they do different holidays. And so that obviously is all their tradition. That's fine. If you want to take Friday off or Saturday off, go for it. But it has no bearing on other Christians. So it's not like it's wrong, but it's just not anything. It's church ecclesiastic doctrine, kind of, not doctrine, but you just practice. So there's things like that in there. So a couple of them I would consider very, at least garbled or something, and something like that not necessary for us. There's rumors of others that I would really, really like to get a hold of. So anyway, so that's my thought on that. If we ever do get a completed version of that in English, that would be fantastic. I'll be one of the first to get one of those, just to see what I think is in the rest of it. So, do most people believe the Antichrist comes from a European country? A lot of them do, and I think that was. That's kind of north, but it's north and then west. So to me, that's a little illogical. But he comes from the area of the 10 nations. And I think that all started back in the 80s when the European Common Market came together. We all thought, okay, well, it must be north and west then, because here's the 10 nations, But they turned out not to be the 10 nations. So now we're back to square one. So Irenaeus, Church Father Irenaeus, gave a really good piece of advice. He said, don't even bother trying to see if, kin's name equals 666 or anything like that. Number one, wait for 10 nations to come out of what used to be the Roman Empire. Then you can look at the countries around them and start looking at their leaders, the kings or whatever, and see if somebody's name equals 666. And he gave an example of, I think, 5 or 6 names that are common names in his day that did equal 666. So there's a lot of, Nero was one, and Titan was one, and Ethnos or something like that. Anyway, he gave several names that equal 666. So especially if it's a common name, a lot of people do it. So it's just one. And there's several people at any time that rule nations that are north of Israel. So again, there could be a king or president, whatever, but could be talking about Lebanon, Assyria, Iraq, possibly Turkey, because it's kind of sort of north. Go straight up, could be Moscow, those kind of things. I don't think it's Turkey or Moscow. Because there's one manuscript in the Ezra Apocalypse. We're talking about the Apocrypha. It talks about Turkey really liking Babylon. Turkey is not Babylon, but it really admires Babylon. And when the 10 nations attack Babylon, Turkey comes to the aid of Babylon and gets wiped out along with Babylon. So that tells us that Turkey is not one of the 10 nations. The Antichrist is not from Turkey. And Turkey is not Babylon. So, from that prophecy, it just puts Turkey out by itself, kind of. But every little bit helps. That doesn't tell us who they are. It just tells us one group that they're not. But that's why a lot of people think that it would be European, because that's the first time we've had any kind of a 10-nation coalition at all. Super chat, $10. Thank you very much. Thank you for your books. Your books and Chuck Missler's commentaries have become excellent Bible study resources for me. I still study with Chuck Smith's books also. Fantastic. Those were 2 amazing guys. I never had a chance to meet Chuck. I was good friends with his brother, Paul Smith, and I did manage to meet Chuck Missler a couple of times. We did a couple of conferences together before he passed, but excellent man, excellent wisdom. Super chat, $10. Thank you very much. Dr. Ken, is there any correlation of the horsemen to the planets and the stars aligned in the constellation? Not that I know of. I mean, there might be something like that, but if it's astrology type stuff, it's garbage and we want to stay away from it. If it's the science of the Magi, then we need to pay attention to the symbols. The zodiac teaches prophecy. And that's why we get the Magi mentioned about the birth of Christ. That whole story is given by Julius Africanus, one of the church fathers, their version of what happened when they found the baby Jesus. It's an amazing story. But anyway, I've studied that a little bit, and I understand the concepts, but I can't string it together. Just something about it. I don't have enough information, or I'm just not that kind of person. It's like when I tried to finish the calendar. I was trying to figure out the leap year system, and I kept looking in the wrong places. I couldn't figure it out. Turns out it's really simple, but the University at Tel Aviv had to figure that part out. So not to my knowledge. Smash the like button. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you want to share it or like it, and also subscribe if you want to make sure that you catch stuff. And remember, YouTube has that where it can be off. I mean, so you're I guess subscribed, but you don't get any notifications. It could be on low and then on high. High means you get everything, and low means you get some things. And I'm not sure how they figure that exactly. So. Just FYI on that. Thank you very much. Super sticker, $10. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Pioneers and Petticoats. Oh, cool. Became a member, Archangel. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We haven't done a whole lot of studies for the members. We've got a few things out there, but not too many of them. I'm planning on starting to do more of those too. It just seems like there's 10,000 things to do. So we're doing the audio book, not the audiobooks, but the second channel for the manuscripts. That's a kind of a priority. So that's taken some time. And I've got my son and daughter-in-law now working with us. So they take care of a lot of the daily stuff. And I get to go back to doing translations. So I'm having fun again. So I'm working at, like I said, I'm up to chapter 17 or 18, just got into 18 of Revelation. And so I want to go back and polish them, and eventually we'll do some of those studies too. Why are the Orthodox Jews attacking Christians in Jerusalem? Is there any biblical correlation there? I don't think so. It's just part of the apostasy. And understand, I'm not saying they're apostate because of what they believe. It's this attitude of, well, like Paul says, not to be a heretic. A heretic you eject out of the church, excommunicate. And it's not a particular doctrine, it's the divisiveness. So when someone comes into your church and finds out you're pre-trib, post-trib, whatever, they can believe something different. It's not that big of a deal. But when they start arguing about it, causing trouble on any subject, they're divisive, they're wicked, they're sinful, they need to be kicked out. And so some groups get so obsessed with whatever doctrine there is that they actually come and try to attack, discredit, whatever, maybe even physically attack people. I knew a guy that was, I worked in one of the churches that I frequented that grew up, Nazarene actually. Nazarenes are good people. I like Nazarenes. But this guy, for some reason, was a Nazarene pastor, and he had gotten the idea that the doctrine of eternal security is Calvinism. Now, if you're a 5-point Calvinist, you have to believe in eternal security, or the Calvinism falls apart. That's true. But as an Armenian, I could believe in it or I don't have to believe in it. It doesn't affect anything else. And I was trying to get that across to him. He's like, no, they're the same. And he had been taught in seminary somewhere that Calvinism is like the lie of the Antichrist. It is like the Antichrist system. Like, where are you getting this stuff from? But anyway, so he equated that with eternal security. So in his mind, not just Calvinists, but even Baptists and half of us that believe in eternal security, we're going to hell. And he would stand up and talk about that publicly. And that's just weird. So, and then in Kansas, we had a group one time that used to, abortion. They used to picket abortion centers, picket churches that were not anti-abortion. And then they got to where they were, I don't know how it was related, but they were picketing military funerals. I think it had something to do with homosexuality and AIDS or something like that. I don't know why military, but it was just they were making a big nuisance of themselves. And it doesn't matter if their doctrine was right or wrong. I don't see how it could be right, but bottom line is they didn't go around teaching that you need to do this. They were just causing trouble. So those kind of people you want to push out. So I know some Orthodox Jews that don't believe in Jesus that I am really good friends with. I mean, many of you know Aaron Lipkin. We're of the same cloth. I mean, whenever we get a chance to get together, we're always talking about the scrolls. He loves the scrolls. I love the scrolls. He's a Jew. I'm a Gentile. We just don't eat together, necessarily and stuff like that. But, it's just interesting. He needs to accept the Messiah. I agree. And I am there. He knows I'm a Christian. He sees how I act. He's even made comments about that. So that's cool. So I know some, and his dad is the same way, same caliber, excellent guy, Avi Lipkin. But I also know some other groups of people that I wouldn't want to be in the same room with. Not that I would fight them. I can't stand that kind of stuff, the constant bickering, and so, yeah, you got to be careful. Well, we have the same thing in Christianity, like my friend that did the Calvinists and Baptists go to hell stuff. So it's like, I'm sorry, I love you, you're a brother, but you're a nut. And I really wish I could get this, to you to understand this. Anyway, so I don't think there's necessarily any correlations to that. But, I mean, it does happen. Would you think that Paul, or don't you think that Paul was going to Damascus okay. To be able to kill the Essenes? Let me change this just a little bit here. Okay. Okay. So I'm being told this question is, could Paul have been going to New Damascus to kill Essenes when Jesus appeared to him instead of Damascus, Syria? Well, that particular one, I think it says Damascus, Syria. And it will tell you it's being run by certain people, and he was let down out of a basket out of the wall that's around there. So I don't think so. You got to be careful when it's Damascus because it could be either one. But I personally think that he went to Damascus, Syria when he had his vision. And then there's another place that says he went to Arabia to study for 3 years, which is what you do if you're becoming an Essene. And then it says he went from there to Damascus and then went north to Jerusalem and then north to his hometown. So Damascus would be south to Jerusalem and then up to his hometown. So if he was in Arabia to Damascus to Jerusalem to his hometown, that seems like it's New Damascus. New Damascus, by the way, if you guys don't know, is the name the Essenes gave to Qumran. So it doesn't have any bearing directly on the old city Damascus, which means something else in another language. But Damask is city of the blood heir. So it's like the city of the Messiah. So they named it that way. So anyway, so yeah, I don't think that particular one, I think that was Damascus, Syria. I could be wrong, though. The UN passed another resolution to take Jerusalem from Israel and give it to the Palestinians. Do you think Zechariah 14 might be before the Ezekiel 37:38 and the church being still here? It's possible. Yeah, Zechariah 14 is Jerusalem being divided and like a war and invasion. That could be the Antichrist, or it could be something like this kind of speculation. Um, as long as we're here, I don't see us doing that. However, you don't know. We've had most governments, well, even right now, if the president were to be really anti-Israel, Congress still has a lot of Christians in it, especially on the Republican side, and some of the Democrats too. But there's enough of them in there that they would say, no, this is not right. Plus, the people that are neutral, that are not Christian or religious at all, some of them are pretty smart. And the bottom line is you have Muslim countries that are ruling with Sharia law, which is a very bad system. And the Constitution says all men, meaning men and women, have inalienable rights given by God. And so no government can usurp those rights, and the Sharia law does. We won't get into it, but there's a lot of really grotesque things associated with Sharia law. So the one country over there that is democratic or Republican type, not Sharia law at least, is Israel. So they're not exactly like our Constitution, but it's the type of democracy idea that we would want to support. You definitely don't want to lose that over there. So right now, it doesn't seem like it. So I've always thought of that as being in the tribulation somewhere, but it very easily could be something else if there's enough time between now and then for a war to happen and then things to get fixed or whatever. Remember, they do have to be there, and they have to have a temple, and that has to be on the Temple Mount. So I'm not sure how the division would happen. Although Revelation talks about measuring the temple and leaving the outer court off. Don't measure it because it's given to the Gentiles for 3.5 months. And so Ezekiel talks about the temple area, and I believe it's to the south. There is a profane thing that sits on the Temple Mount. And the idea is that they build a wall between the two. So if those are both future, and if they're one and the same or parts of the same prophecy, that means the Dome of the Rock will stay, and they'll put a wall up between it and build the temple. They'll just leave out the outer court so both can be on the Temple Mount. That may or may not be the way it happens, but that's one theory anyway. So yeah, it's possible. I'm not sure about that. I thought that the king of the north was Russia. Russia is called Gog. Gog is a word for roof, or the furthest north. So the furthest north is Russia, which is in the land of Magog, which Magog is the Scythian or Scythian area, which is southern Russia. So we know that. But in Daniel, the king of the north and the king of the south are the Brass Mountains. So that's the Syria area and the Egyptian area, or was back then. So, but it's going to have some sort of a meaning like that. Where can I get the information to calculate the numerical value of names? Just curious what the value would be for Marcion. Okay, from France, yeah. First off, I would guess it would be Hebrew. The church fathers say Greek. So, but the bottom line is in English, you have like A, B, C, and then we have a different character set for our numbers, 1, 2, and 3. In Greek and Hebrew both, it's the same character set. So like A is 1, B is also 2, and then G is the third letter. It would be 3, and it goes on down like that. So you can look those up because they're still used. So there's a Hebrew version and a Greek version. You can just look them up online, just the alphabet and the numbers, and you'll come up with these charts and show you what they are. And then you can plug those in. So like KEN, if you put that together and add them up, it would be 72. And I did it in both. So it's 72 in Greek and it's 72 in Hebrew also. The letters are close. There's some letters that are different. But yeah, you can just look those up. It's a fascinating study, though. But again, Church Father Irenaeus said not to put a whole lot of stock in it because, number one, the 10 nations have to arise first. And then he might be the king of a nation, but he doesn't do much of anything until after the 10 nations come. They don't get along too well, so he comes in and forces it, kind of takes it over. Someone has claimed that the land of cities without walls is the USA because Russia is the uttermost north from us. Okay. That's interesting. Well, north of us is Canada and then the North Pole. That's almost like that. I mean, you can go northwest and get to Russia or west or east, I guess, but but this whole idea of going up to the North Pole and then continuing and the guy on the other side of the planet is actually north of me is not. He's east or west of me. So that's why we have an east and a west and a north and south pole. So yeah, Russia is the uttermost north of that area over there. From the Middle East standpoint, from Jerusalem, then you would go north to Syria and Lebanon. You go further north, there's Turkey. Further north, there's Russia. And there's nothing north of Russia other than the North Pole, which is not a country per se. How does that fit with the armies falling onto the mountains of Israel? Well, the prophecy in chapter 38 and 39 of Ezekiel talks about an invasion army from the land of Magog, which is Gog, the furthest country north. So Magog is the ancient Scythian or Scythian area, which is southern Russia. So that's obviously a Russian invasion. And we know this from Josephus and from Jasher and several other books, who Magog, and some of their kids went different places, but the original land of these places are very well depicted. In Jasher, it mentions the land of Magog and mentions the first 2 or 3 Scythian kings by name. So when you talk about this weird land that starts off with a President Washington and then goes forward, it's pretty obvious that's the United States. So in this case, it's Magog, which could be Russia or somewhere else. But the first 3 kings were 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that's southern Russia. There's no doubt about that. So anyway, so yeah, the land without cities, without walls, refers to Jerusalem. They would be living in peace without walls. And there's some debate on what that means or how that comes together. But I don't think that has anything to do with the USA. I do believe the USA is mentioned in Scripture. I think it's actually part of Ezekiel 37. The cubs of Tarshish. We know for sure that Tarshish is Britain because in Isaiah 60 or 61, it mentions that when Israel comes back the second time, the ships of Tarshish would be the one to bring them home. And England is the one that got the Balfour Declaration, not Spain, or got the commission to take care of the Palestinian mandate, to carve it up and do whatever with it. Spain had some other part that they carved up and did whatever with. So Britain is Tarshish. The cubs of Tarshish, people usually look at that and say it's just anybody that Britain spawned, which is like half the planet, But the wording in Hebrew specifically means a group of cubs. So there might be a cub like South Africa, a cub or two that's Mexico or Canada or whatever. But there's only a group of cubs, specifically 13 colonies, that came together to form a nation. And so the way the language is, it could be either or, but the way the language is, it really makes it look like there is a group of cubs, a group of nations, states, that come together to form a power, and they are the cubs of or came out of England, not Spain, but yeah. So and then it tells you what we do during the war. So we know we're still here when when Russia invades Israel. Rapture may have happened. There may not be any Christians in the United States at that point, but we're not nuked or anything at that point. We're still here. Okay. And let's see. Could the Vehicon in Jubilees, I'm not sure what that is, be substituted for the Kof of the ages? Oh, okay. And used as a follow this number symbol, but mistranslated as the value of 100. That's possible. Yeah, it's a lot of things like that happen. That's why we got to be so careful with the manuscripts. For a good example of this kind of a thing happening, it has happened before. In 1 Timothy 4, it talks about, see if I get this right out of King James, it says that God was manifest in the flesh, seen of the Spirit, taken up, and it's obviously talking about the Messiah. And it's one of the verses that people use to say that Jesus is God incarnate, Messiah is God incarnate, because it says God was manifested in the flesh. Some of the modern translations will say he who was manifested in the flesh. So he's not necessarily God. And they get this by saying the earliest manuscripts don't have God in there. It says who. Well, the bottom line is we have tons of manuscripts that say God, and they group them together to say those all came from a manuscript that was messed up. And there's actually one or two, I think it's just one, but there's one or two manuscripts that have who. But here's the way it works. The word for God is theos. It's TH, which is a circle with a line through it. THEOS. The EOS is really just like we have EOS. But manuscripts, paper is expensive. So they started abbreviating the word of God as just the TH, so the circle with the line through it, and an S. So that's theos. It's an abbreviation. Well, if you smudged the center part and the line is not there, it would be an OS, and that would be the word who. Okay, so there's one manuscript that says who, except if you look at it really close, and they're online, if you look at it really close, it looks like it could have had a smudge, and there might have been a line in it. There was either a line in it before smudged out, or somebody, got a fingerprint on it or something. So so you've got many, many manuscripts saying God was manifested in the flesh, and you've got one manuscript that says who was manifested in the flesh. And they'll translate that, he who was manifested in the flesh. It doesn't make any sense in Greek. You don't say, who was it? It's almost like the Abbott and Costello, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, is on third. It's that kind of a thing. It's obviously a smudge when you've got all these others saying God and this one with possibly a smudge in it. So same kind of stuff could happen here. That happens in a lot of times. That's why you got to look very, very careful. It's one thing I'm blessed with the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can actually go online to Dead Sea Scrolls .something.il. I forget, but it's the library in Israel, and they have the high-res photographs. So if you think there's something smudged, you can just blow it up where you've got the big letter, and you can look real close, and you can decide if you think there's a smudge, was there a line or a spot, and then, if you can look at it really close, you can decide and probably be pretty accurate what it is. So yeah, I would think that's a possibility. So fascinating things in the translation process. Do you think the first 3.5 years will be peace for Israel, and that time will be strong? The strong delusion will be sent. I think so. It seems like a peace plan is negotiated, and it talks about the major persecution starting when the abomination is put forth. So there still may be skirmishes with people, but all in all, I think they form a contract, so to speak, with the Antichrist and have at least a relative peace. Half the planet does not like the Antichrist. If you look careful at Scripture, they're not necessarily Christian, but they're more of a patriot type thing. May not even believe in God per se, but you're not going to tell me what to do. That kind of a thing. So there's all these, Egypt for one, like, no, you're not taking over, and we will fight you. We'll go to war. We'll wipe you out. That's their attitude, and they get wiped out by the king of the north. So, yeah, I think there's probably a peace of some sort, maybe a really good, complete peace, but there's probably still skirmishes around. Supers chat, $20. Thank you very much. Hope you were able to answer my question above, but I wanted to support your great work. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much. Like hearing the word every Monday. Well, we're here almost every Monday. Okay, last question here. Just to be able to join the conversation, but was wondering where are the souls of the Old Testament saints while the church is with Christ in heaven? And second, where do the souls of those who die in the millennium? That's debated on a lot of groups. In my opinion, there is a difference between Old Testament saints and the church. And there's a difference between both of them and the millennial saints and the people in the millennium. There are differences. But as far as salvation goes, we're all saved by believing in the Messiah of the faith without works. The works of the law are important, and you might get excommunicated or killed for not doing what you're told back in the day. But that still has nothing to do with your salvation. You're believing and waiting on a Messiah, or you're not. So, since we're all believers or we're not believers, that's how salvation works. I'm not too sure that when we're in heaven that it won't be the other saints with us. So, but there's a bit of a debate on that, because Jesus said many will sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. And that's probably referring to the millennial reign rather than, the bride of Christ. So it might be that they wait, some time or whatever. But see, according to the text in Scripture, it used to be when you died believing in Messiah, you went to Hades, the bosom of Abraham, because you can't be in God's presence because there's been no payment yet. Jesus hadn't died on the cross. So you're in a holding cell, so to speak. The other people are in torment in hell. But when Jesus died, then they were all able to go to heaven. So there's no longer a holding place per se, or no one in there anyway. Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." And that's different from the holding place. Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, not in a holding place. So there's many scriptures that indicate now we simply go to the Father, whereas before we could not. So there's different ideas on that, but I tend to think if you're a believer, you're a believer. The same kind of a thing people say, well, if you don't believe in a pre-trib rapture, or you're not walking the way you should, and the rapture happens, are you going to go in the rapture? Bottom line is, are you a believer? I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some of us directly sin, and the Lord chastises us. But that's one thing. I don't think that you have to be absolutely perfect to go in the rapture, because I think that would defeat the purpose of the rapture as being a sign that engenders repentance. So, however, we're in heaven with Christ, and then the people that are still on earth become the tribulation saints, or probably martyred, and then they would be resurrected at the end of the tribulation period, because it says in Revelation that there are two groups that rule during the millennial reign, and that's the church and the tribulation saints. It makes a difference between the two. So we're raptured, resurrected, raptured, and the tribulation saints are martyred. But when the millennial reign starts, we're both ruling and reigning with Christ over human beings that repopulate the planet. The people before, I'm not sure. So good question. Okay, one more question popped up. So let me do those here. So would the Antichrist possibly be Muslim? He may start out that way, but according to Daniel 11, he introduces his own religious system. So he uses Mystery Babylon, which is some sort of religious system. And according to the book of Gad, that is a combination of Roman Catholicism and Islam. So it's probably not Islam proper or Roman Catholicism proper, but some sort of weird mixture. We have stuff like that today. We have like Islam and Hinduism, for instance, and then there are Sikhs or Jains. I forget which ones they are, but a group of people that mix the two. And there's people that mix Roman Catholicism and other things, and they're really small cults, basically. But Gad says there's at least a group of each group that come together to form something. So that would be like a Chrislam type thing. And so he uses the political power of the religion that's there. And it seems to be based more in Rome, which would lead you to believe Roman Catholicism might become very wishy-washy and accept Islam as just another branch, kind of an okay thing, which seems like that's what the current Pope is doing. So it seems like things are drifting that direction. But he uses the current system, whatever that is, Mystery Babylon, to come to power. Once he's in full control in the very middle of the tribulation period, he and the 10 nations attack and destroy Mystery Babylon. And then he sets up his own religion, with the false prophet being a type of pope, if you want to call it that. But it tells us a little bit about how he does that. It's kind of cryptic, but it's obviously not Islam or Roman Catholicism or even Chrislam. That stuff is done away with, and it's kind of an ancestor worship type thing. You can read about it in Daniel. Okay, I lied. One more question popped up. Yeah, I need to get off here pretty quick. The book of Enoch, when Enoch explains the movement of the sun, moon, and the winds, is that the proper book? I'm not sure the question exactly, but there's places where he talks about the calendar section, about the sun, moon, and stars for the calendar, and then he talks about the hot winds coming and the cool winds and the rainy season. So he's talking about summer and winter and the rainy seasons. That's just how he's describing it. So yes, Enoch is talking about the same Dead Sea Scroll calendar, the same 364-day calendar year with the leap week and all that stuff. So yeah, fascinating thing. So okay, we'll go ahead and say good night, and we will talk to you guys next week with some more prophecy stuff, most likely. God bless you guys, and we'll see you